Let's talk a little bit about President Obama. Now, Republicans have been flipping out because President Obama went to Hawaii in the middle of this fiscal cliff negotiation. Now, if for a second they stopped to look at the actual numbers, they would know that President George W. Bush was on vacation something like 30% of the time he was president, and President Obama has been on vacation less than a third of that. But that doesn't matter. You know, I think part of it is the Hawaii-Texas thing, Daryl, because it's like when you hear George W. Bush went to Texas, it just doesn't sound like as much of a vacation as President Obama went to Hawaii, even though he's from Hawaii. That's just where he's from. You know, it just sounds much more relaxed, I feel like.
Yeah, you get this image that he's out on a beach someplace swimming on surfing on a wave.
Well, he kind of was, because that's actually the image that was on the front page of a lot of newspapers. But listen, that's what there is to do there. I don't think there's anything wrong with it.
No, in fact, I think that George Bush should have surfed on a few waves while he was in office.
Yeah, maybe he would have been a more reasonable guy if that was the case. Putting aside the fact, though, that President Obama vacations way less than President Bush did, President Obama has decided to leave his vacation early. He's going to come back to Washington, work on the fiscal cliff deal. This is one of those things where you hear about all the time off that these members of Congress get and how much they're flying back and forth from their districts constantly, and they really only work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but at the same time they're kind of always working. They're coming back. I don't actually have any problem. Tons of people depend on this. I don't really find myself feeling sorry that they may not have their full New Year's vacation because there's big stuff to figure out here, isn't there?
There is. And the president, I mean, no matter who it is, the president never really has any time off. That's not happening. I think that the members of Congress, when they go back home, they really are having time off. They're not working necessarily, while the president is technically going to be working wherever he's at.
Yeah, and you know, if we look at the latest polls, people are not really happy with what Republicans are doing here, and they do seem to think President Obama is doing somewhat of a good job here. This is according to a Gallup poll, so I know that Gallup was a disaster in the 2012 election, so maybe we don't even believe anything Gallup says at this point, but let's assume for a second that we do. A slight majority of Americans, 54%, now approve of President Obama's handling of the negotiations. This is up from 48% a week ago. And this coincides with an increase in President Obama's job approval rating. On the other hand, Republican approval ratings have been plummeting after the Plan B fiasco, or the second plan which was rejected. Natan, do you believe that we are getting actually reasonable response here from Americans? They realize who is actually willing to negotiate here and who isn't? Or can we just not trust this poll at all?
No, I think we can. I mean, we know that people want taxes on the richest people to go up, which is what Obama wants, and they're more hesitant to allow cuts to Social Security and Medicare. So I guess it makes sense that they would agree more with Obama's take on this.
Do you even look at polls anymore, Daryl, after what happened with, Nate Silver got it 100% right, and all of these individual pollsters said, no, Romney's definitely up 8. I mean, I don't, on this show, we're now particularly skeptical of polling.
I can't help it. I do. I don't necessarily believe what I hear. I like to watch polls just to look at different networks and see how they claim to be polling the same people and
Right.
come up with such extremely different results.
Yeah, well, Fox News always seems, whenever it's a poll that agrees with their narrative, or it's like from Rasmussen, their demeanor is calm and kind of happy, and oh, the American people are so smart. All of a sudden, when it's a poll that doesn't go along with their narrative, it's a shocking poll that is questionable in terms of its methodology and bias all of a sudden, and they're angry. They're very, very angry when it's a questionable poll.
All of a sudden, polls don't matter when it doesn't fall into their favor. You got to forget all about polls. But when it falls into their favor, they'll state the poll as though it's just fact.
Well, whatever happens with the polls, I think we need to have some kind of resolution on this fiscal cliff thing. And remember, when Republicans are willing to negotiate on the things that are going to happen anyway if they do nothing, it's not really a negotiation, right? In other words, if I come to the table and say, I'm willing to accept exactly what will happen anyway if I simply don't negotiate with you, there's no big round of applause for being for compromising, is there, Daryl?
No, there isn't. But you also have to realize that they're in a weird position too, because the people that are against them are never going to vote for them in the first place, and their base wants them to do this. Even though it's going to be a chaotic situation, the people that they're expecting to reelect them, they're wanting this.
Do you agree with that, Natan? Is it one of these things where it's just there's almost like it's not a litmus test per se, but it's just kind of like you need to be able to check the box for the base to continue supporting you?
Yes, and I think the reason why that's the case is mainly because of gerrymandering. We have gerrymandered districts in large parts of the country where you have so many voters of one party in that district who are going to make a challenge in the primary. So the primary is really the only election a lot of these guys have to deal with. And if they don't go far enough to the right or the left, then they're not going to win.
All right, well, we're going to see what happens with the fiscal cliff negotiations.